For decades, the Republic of Korea has been building an empire not of steel or weapons, but of melody, dance, and charisma. But who are the real architects of this cultural revolution? Who are the ones that made the leaders of the free world sit up and take notice? Today, we are diving deep into the corridors of the Blue House, where the highest office in the land, the president, has officially bestowed the crown of music kings upon a select few. This isn't just about popularity, it's about the moments when a single group could stop time, bridge political divides, and represent an entire heritage on the global stage. Have you ever wondered which group was the very first to break the presidential seal of approval, or which act managed to turn a diplomatic summit into a full-blown concert that left world leaders in awe? We're peeling back the layers of history, looking at the blood, sweat, and tears that transformed these idols into national treasures. From the pioneers who laid the foundation in the early 90s to the modern-day giants who are rewriting the history books as we speak, no, these are the legends who didn't just win trophies, they won the respect of presidents. Who among them was called the national pride during a state visit? Which group's influence was so massive it was cited as a key factor in Korea's economic strategy? Prepare yourself for a journey through the Hall of Fame like you've never seen before, counting down the elite, the iconic, and the untouchable. Are you ready to see who made the cut and why their names are etched into the political and cultural fabric of South Korea forever? This is more than just K-pop. This is the story of the kings who conquered the world under the watchful, proud eyes of their nation's leaders. Let the countdown of the ultimate musical royalty begin right now as we explore the 9 K-pop groups officially recognized by the presidents. Number 9. Seo Taiji and Boys, the pioneers who broke the chains, the cultural revolution that defined a nation. To truly understand why the president of South Korea would ever look at a group of young men dancing on stage and see kings, we have to travel back to a time when the country was still finding its modern voice, specifically the early 1990s. Imagine a South Korea that was conservative, rigid, and still heavily influenced by strict broadcasting regulations that censored anything deemed too Western or rebellious. This is the world that Seo, Taiji, and Boys stepped into. And they didn't just walk through the door, they kicked it down with a force that shifted the tectonic plates of Korean society forever. When Seo Taiji, Young Hyun-suk, and Lee Juno debuted with Nana Ryo in 1992, the critics actually hated them, giving them low scores on talent shows. But the youth saw their reflection in these 3 men. This wasn't just music, it was a declaration of independence for a generation that felt silenced. The reason they hold the number 9 spot on our list of presidential recognition is rooted in the culture-first policy that would later become a hallmark of South Korean governance. Specifically, it was President Kim Dae-jung, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who famously recognized Seo Taiji as the president of culture. Think about that for a second, a sitting president acknowledging a pop star with a title that mirrored his own. President Kim Dae-jung understood that for Korea to survive the brutal IMF financial crisis and thrive in the 21st century, it needed more than just semiconductors and cars, it needed soft power. Seo Taiji and Boys were the blueprint for that power. They tackled social issues head-on, from the pressure of the education system in Classroom Idea to the longing for national reunification in Balhero Gumgumye. They were the first to prove that music could be a vehicle for social change, a concept that deeply resonated with the political leadership of the time. The narrative of their rise is one of pure grit and intellectual defiance. Seo Taiji himself was a high school dropout who chose to follow his vision rather than the traditional path, a story that inspired millions. Their impact was so massive that when they announced their retirement in 1996, it caused a national mourning period, with news programs interrupting their regular schedules to report on the heartbreak of the nation's youth. Even the government realized that this wasn't just a fandom phenomenon, it was a cultural shift that could define Korea's identity on the global stage. President Kim Dae-jung's admiration for Seo Taiji wasn't just about the catchy tunes, it was about the way Seo Taiji fought against the pre-censorship system. Before them, every lyric had to be approved by a government body, but Seo Taiji and Boys pushed back so hard that the system eventually collapsed, leading to the creative freedom that K-pop artists enjoy today. When we look back at the documentary footage of their concerts, you see a sea of fans who aren't just screaming, they are crying because they finally feel understood. This emotional connection is what caught the eyes of the Blue House. They saw that Seo Taiji and Boys had done something no politician could. They had united the hearts of the younger generation. The king's title here isn't just about record sales, although they broke every record in the book. It's about being the architects of the modern Korean soul. Every time you see a K-pop idol today speaking out about mental health or social justice, you are seeing the DNA of Seo, Taiji, and Boys. They were the ones who convinced the highest office in the land that culture was the most valuable export Korea had. Their legacy is so thick with historical significance that it feels less like pop history and more like a national epic. They were the bridge between a closed, traditional society and the vibrant, global powerhouse we see today. Can you imagine the sheer pressure of being the group that had to prove to a whole nation of elders that rap music and streetwear weren't corrupting the youth, but rather empowering them? They stood their ground, and in doing so, they earned the respect of the presidency, securing their place as the foundation upon which the entire K-pop empire was built. It's a story of 3 kids who changed the law of the land just by being themselves, making them the ultimate kings who started it all under the watchful and eventually admiring eyes of the government. This is where the story of presidential approval begins, not with a handshake in a boardroom, but with a revolution on a stage that forced the leaders of the country to acknowledge that the voice of the youth was the future of the nation. As we move forward, the stakes only get higher, the stages get bigger, and the presidential involvement becomes even more direct. But never forget, it all started here, with the president of culture and a group that dared to say what everyone else was thinking. Are you starting to see how deep this rabbit hole goes? The connection between the Blue House and the idol stage is more than just PR. It's a symbiotic relationship that has defined the very identity of South Korea for over 30 years. What happens when the next generation takes this foundation and goes global? Stay tuned, because the next name on our list didn't just break the rules, they rewrote the entire manual for what a national representative looks like. Number 8. H.O.T, the architects of the idol era, the white wave that enchanted the presidency. If Seo Taiji and Boys were the spark that lit the fire, then H.O.T was the massive, unstoppable forest fire that consumed the entire nation and caught the attention of the highest office in the land, proving that idols weren't just a trend, but a national asset. Imagine the mid to late 1,990 seconds of time when South Korea was facing its darkest economic hour during the IMF financial crisis. People were losing their jobs, families were struggling, and a sense of hopelessness hung over the streets of Seoul like a thick fog. In the middle of this despair, 5 young men, Kangta, Moon Hee-jun, Tony An, Jang Woo-hyuk, and Lee Jae-won, emerged as more than just singers. They became the emotional anchors of a crumbling nation. This is why President Kim Dae-jung, a man who saw the future of Korea in its culture, looked at H.O.T and didn't just see a boy band, but the kings of the new era. President Kim Dae-jung was a visionary who believed in the power of cultural technology, a term coined by SM Dae's Entertainment's founder Lee Soo-man, and H.O.T was the primary proof that this theory worked. The relationship between H.O.T and the presidency wasn't just about a photo op, it was about the government realizing that these boys had the power to heal a wounded public and represent Korea's resilience to the world. One of the most legendary moments in this relationship happened in 1999 during the Michael Jackson and Friends benefit concert in Seoul. Picture the scene. The king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, is on stage, and right there with him, representing the pride of South Korea, were the members of H.O.T. President Kim Dae-jung was in the audience, watching as these 5 boys showed the world that Korea was still standing, still creative, and still powerful. It was a symbolic passing of the torch where the president saw the potential for K-pop to become a global diplomatic tool. But their kingship wasn't just handed to them, they earned it through a level of fandom that actually forced the government to change how the city functioned. Have you ever heard of a group so popular that the government had to extend the operating hours of the Seoul subway system just so fans could get home after a concert? That was the reality of H.O.T. In 1999, during their historic Jamsil Olympic Stadium concert, the first time a Korean pop act had ever sold out that venue, the Seoul Metropolitan Government officially extended the subway until 2 a.m. This became known as the H.O.T law, a testament to the fact that their influence was so massive it required state intervention. The sight of tens of thousands of fans dressed in white raincoats, waving white balloons, created a white wave that was so visually and culturally dominant, it felt like a new national movement. Musically, they weren't just singing about love, they were the voice of a generation facing systemic issues. Their debut song, Warrior's Descendant, took a hard, uncompromising stand against school violence, a topic that was taboo at the time but desperately needed to be addressed. Then came Ai Ya, a haunting and powerful tribute to the children who tragically lost their lives in the Sealand Youth Training Center fire. This wasn't just pop music, this was social commentary that resonated with the president's own democratic and humanitarian ideals. By addressing the pain of the people, H.O.T became the national representatives in the truest sense. They were the first group to sell over 1 million albums in the modern era, even when the economy was in tatters, proving that the Korean people would prioritize their cultural identity over almost anything else. Their impact was so profound that even years after their disbandment, they are still spoken of in the halls of the Blue House as the blueprint for the Hallyu wave. They were the ones who taught the government that if you invest in your artists, the world will eventually come knocking at your door. The emotional weight of H.O.T is hard to overstate. For the IMF generation, they were the light at the end of a very dark tunnel. When they performed Hope, it wasn't just a song, it was a national anthem of recovery that the president himself could get behind. They were the first to truly bridge the gap between teen idol and national treasure, creating a legacy where being a K-pop star meant carrying the weight of the nation's reputation on your pop star shoulders. Can you feel the sheer intensity of a time when 5 teenagers could make a president believe that music was the key to saving an entire economy? They laid the groundwork for everything that followed, from the training systems to the global touring circuits, all while maintaining a connection to the social fabric of Korea that few have ever matched. Their story is one of breaking records, changing laws, and winning the heart of a president who was searching for a way to show the world the new Korea. As we look back, their kingship is etched in the white balloons that once filled the sky and the official government records that acknowledge them as the pioneers of the Korean wave. But as the 90 seconds turned into the 2000s, the world started to change, and a new kind of power was needed to take K-pop across the oceans. Who was the group that took this presidential blessing and used it to finally crack the global market wide open? Who was the act that made the world realize that K-pop wasn't just a Korean phenomenon, but a global revolution? Are you ready to see how the next group on our list turned the president's vision into a worldwide reality? Number 7. Girls' Generation, the invincible queens of the national brand, the faces that represented a sovereign dream. When we talk about the kings of music recognized by the presidency, we cannot ignore the 9 women who redefined what it meant to be a national representative, transforming from a group of talented girls into the very silhouette of South Korea's global identity during the Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye administrations. Girls' Generation, or SNSD, didn't just top the charts. They became an official extension of the South Korean government's diplomatic arm, earning the title of National Girl Group, not just from fans, but through official state recognition that few acts have ever touched. Imagine the year 2009, the world was reeling from a global financial crisis, yet in South Korea, a brightly colored fever was taking over, led by 9 girls in neon skinny jeans singing, "Gee!" It wasn't just a song. It was a psychological phenomenon that provided a much-needed serotonin boost to a nation under pressure, and the Blue House took notice of this incredible unifying power. By the time they released Tell Me Your Wish, Genie, they weren't just idols, they were icons of modern Korean precision, discipline, and aesthetic perfection, embodying the miracle on the Han River in human form. This is why, in 2010, they were officially appointed as the ambassadors for the Visit Korea Year campaign, a state-sponsored initiative where their faces were plastered on every plane, bus, and billboard entering the country, essentially making them the first people the world saw when they thought of South Korea. President Lee Myung-bak and First Lady Kim Yoon-ok didn't just admire them from afar. They invited the group to the Blue House for a high-profile luncheon, recognizing them as the face of the nation and praising their role in elevating the K-brand to unprecedented heights. Can you imagine the sheer weight of expectation on these young women, knowing that when they stood on a stage in Paris, New York, or Tokyo, they weren't just representing a record label, but the dignity and cultural prestige of their entire home country? Their performance at the G20 Seoul Summit in 2010 was a turning point where the government explicitly used their performance to showcase Korea's soft power to the leaders of the world's 20 largest economies. They were the chosen ones to prove that Korea was no longer just a country of heavy industry and technology, but a cultural superpower that could dictate global trends. The emotional resonance of their debut song, Into the New World, eventually evolved into a modern-day anthem for social change, being sung by students during protests and by citizens during moments of national reflection, showing that their music had a soul that went far deeper than the bubblegum pop label. The presidency recognized that Girls' Generation possessed a unique, clean, and sophisticated image that was perfect for diplomacy. They were the group invited to meet foreign dignitaries and were often mentioned in presidential speeches as the pride of the Korean people. Every member, Taeyeon, Jessica, Sunny, Tiffany, Hyoyeon, Yuri, Sooyoung, Yoona, and Sohyun became a household name that crossed generational divides, from the uncle fans in their 50s to the toddlers in preschool, creating a rare moment of total national consensus. They were the ones who truly opened the gates for the second generation of K-pop to conquer Japan and the West, with the Blue House closely monitoring their success at the SM Town Live in Paris as a benchmark for how the government should fund and support cultural exports. Their kingship is rooted in this absolute reliability. They were the group the president could call upon to represent the best of Korea at any moment, knowing they would deliver perfection with a smile that hid the years of grueling training and the immense pressure of their status. Even when the political landscape shifted, their position as the national icons remained untouched, a testament to the way they had woven themselves into the very fabric of the country's public image. Think about the atmosphere of those Blue House visits, the hushed whispers of staff, the formal protocols, and then these 9 girls entering with an aura of professionalism that rivaled the diplomats themselves. They proved that K-pop was more than entertainment. It was a bridge, a handshake, and a symbol of a rising nation that refused to be ignored. Their legacy is defined by this transition from girls to sovereign representatives, making them the ultimate queens who were treated with the respect of kings by the highest office in the land. They didn't just sing about genies and H.O.T, they lived a reality where they were the ones granting the nation's wish for global recognition and respect. As we look at the list of groups that have walked the halls of the Blue House, Girls' Generation stands out as the group that turned soft power into a tangible, divisible force that the president could use to change the way the world looked at Korea forever. Their influence paved the way for every group that followed, setting a standard of national representation that is still the gold standard today. But as the era of the second generation reached its peak, a new force was gathering, a group that wouldn't just be ambassadors, but would become a global storm so powerful it would challenge the very boundaries of music and politics. Who was the group that took this national pride and turned it into a global revolution that even the president had to acknowledge as an economic miracle on its own? Are you ready to see which group next claimed their throne as the undisputed kings of the world stage? Number 6. BIGBANG, the vanguard of cultural sovereignty, the icons who turned art into national strategy. To talk about BIGBANG in the context of presidential recognition is to talk about a group that didn't just play the game, they changed the rules of what a K-pop group could represent to the state, moving from mere performers to being hailed as the creative icons of Korea during the Park Geun-hye administration. Imagine the mid-2010 seconds, a period where South Korea was pivoting its entire national identity toward the concept of a creative economy, a strategy designed to make the country a global leader in innovation and culture. In 2016, the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism officially appointed BIGBANG as the National Creative Icons, a title that wasn't just a fancy label but a formal recognition by the government that G-Dragon, T.O.P, Taehyung, Daesung, and Seungri were the ultimate embodiments of Korea's modern soul. This was the first time the presidency and the government had looked at a group known for their rebellious, bad boy image, avant-garde fashion, and raw hip-hop energy and decided they were the best possible face for creative Korea. This wasn't the clean-cut, polite image of previous eras. This was something visceral and authentic that the president recognized as a unique power to attract the world's youth. Think about the sheer cultural weight of G-Dragon being invited to participate in official government-backed forums, where his artistic vision was analyzed as a blueprint for the nation's future exports. The Blue House saw in BIGBANG a group that didn't just follow trends but created them, a quality that mirrored the miracle on the Han River but for the digital age. Their influence was so potent that their music videos, like Bang 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 and Fantastic Baby, weren't just seen as entertainment. They were viewed by the government as sophisticated marketing for the Korean lifestyle, fashion, and technology. There was an emotional depth to this recognition too. During a time of political tension, Big Bang's music was famously broadcast across the DMZ toward North Korea as a symbol of the South's cultural superiority and freedom, a psychological tool so powerful that the North often demanded it be stopped. Can you imagine the intensity of knowing your voice is being used by the state as a literal weapon of peace? The presidency recognized that Big Bang had achieved a level of cool that was beyond any marketing budget. They were the first group to truly break the mold of the manufactured idol, showing the world that Korean artists were self-produced, autonomous, and artistically brilliant. This authenticity was what the president wanted the world to associate with the Made in Korea brand. Their 10th anniversary concert in Seoul was a logistical masterpiece that the city and government supported because they knew that Big Bang was a walking, breathing tourism industry. The narrative of Big Bang is one of defying expectations. They were the kings who didn't wait for permission to be great, but whose greatness was so undeniable that the president had no choice but to officially crown them as the nation's creative vanguard. They represent the moment when the Blue House realized that being edgy and original was more valuable than being perfect, a realization that paved the way for the global dominance of K-pop in the years that followed. Their legacy is etched in the way they forced the government to view idols as total artists rather than just commercial products. They weren't just singers. They were the pioneers of a new era of cultural sovereignty, proving that 5 young men from Seoul could dictate the taste of the entire planet while carrying the official blessing of their nation's leader. As we look back, their kingship is a reminder that the most powerful thing a nation can produce is a group that refuses to be anything but themselves. But as Big Bang pushed the boundaries of what was possible, a new group was rising, one that would take this national representative status and turn it into a global phenomenon of such epic proportions that they would eventually be granted diplomatic passports and stand at the podium of the United Nations. Who was the group that turned the president's admiration into a global diplomatic mission? Are you ready to see who takes the next spot on our list of presidential kings? Number 5. EXO, the nation's pick, the bridge of diplomacy that enchanted world leaders. When we talk about the absolute pinnacle of being kings, recognized by the presidency, we have to talk about the group that was literally chosen by the state to represent the face of modern South Korea during one of the most significant global events in history, the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. EXO didn't just climb the charts, they became a vital organ of South Korean diplomacy under the administration of President Moon Jae-in, earning the prestigious title of the nation's pick. Imagine the atmosphere in February 2018. The entire world was watching as South Korea hosted the Winter Games, a moment of immense national pride and a delicate balancing act of international relations. When it came time for the closing ceremony, a performance that would be broadcast to billions and define the brand of Korea for the next decade, the government didn't look for just any popular act. They looked for the group that embodied power, discipline, and a supernatural level of performance. That group was EXO. Watching them perform growl and power in that freezing stadium, surrounded by traditional Korean dancers and cutting-edge technology, was a moment that transcended entertainment. It was a statement of national strength. President Moon Jae-in and the First Lady weren't just spectators, they were fans who officially recognized the group's contribution to the nation's image. But the kingship of EXO goes even deeper into the halls of the Blue House. Can you imagine being a K-pop idol and being called to the presidential palace not for an award, but to help host a sitting president of the United States? In June 2019, during a high-stakes diplomatic visit, President Moon Jae-in invited EXO to the Blue House to meet and greet President Donald Trump and his daughter Ivanka Trump. This wasn't just a casual meetup. It was a strategic move by the South Korean government to use EXO's global influence as a bridge of friendship between two world powers. Ivanka Trump had previously mentioned her children were fans of the group, and the presidency utilized this soft power to create a warm, approachable atmosphere during a time of intense political tension. There is a legendary photo of the EXO members standing alongside the two world leaders, looking every bit as professional and dignified as the diplomats themselves. This moment solidified their status as the kings of diplomacy. The government's trust in EXO was so absolute because they were the group that revived the physical album market, becoming the first quadruple million sellers in a digital age, a feat that the Ministry of Culture cited as a turning point for the Korean music industry's economic health. Their fans, the XOL, were so globally organized that the government saw them as a massive, decentralized cultural embassy. The narrative of EXO is one of noblesse oblige. They carried the heavy crown of being the nation's representatives with a grace that few could manage. Even their concept as aliens with superpowers was viewed by cultural critics and government officials as a metaphor for Korea's own rapid, supernatural rise on the global stage. The emotional weight of seeing these 9 young men, Suho, Xiumin, Lei, Baekhyun, Chen, Chanyol, Do, Kai, and Sehun bowing to the president after representing the country on the world stage is something that still gives fans chills. They weren't just singing about Monster or Love Shot, they were the rhythmic heartbeat of a nation that was showing the world it had arrived. The presidency recognized that EXO had a regal quality, a combination of elite training and humble service to their country, which made them the perfect choice for state-sponsored events. They were the ones who proved that K-pop could be used as a formal diplomatic tool, paving the way for the idol diplomat era we see today. Their legacy is defined by these moments in the Blue House and on the Olympic stage, where they were no longer just idols, but the kings of the Republic of Korea's cultural identity. Every record they broke was treated by the Korean media and the government as a victory for the country itself. Can you feel the sheer pride of a nation that looked at EXO and said, "These are our boys, and they are showing the world what we are capable of"? They were the group that made the presidency realize that K-pop wasn't just an export, it was a bridge to the future of international relations. But as EXO sat at the table with presidents and world leaders, another group was preparing to take this national status and turn it into something the world had never seen. A group that would become so influential, they would literally change the laws of the country. Who was the group that took the kingship to the floor of the United Nations? Are you ready for the next level of this royal countdown? Number 4. Super Junior, the unstoppable emperors of the Hallyu Wave, the global diplomats who turned the world into a blue galaxy. If you want to talk about a group that didn't just walk into the Blue House but practically became a permanent fixture in South Korea's diplomatic arsenal, you have to talk about the Kings of Hallyu, Super Junior. While other groups were focusing on the domestic market or nearby neighbors, Super Junior was the first group to truly treat the entire planet as their stage, and this global bravery caught the eye of multiple South Korean presidents, from Lee Myung-bak to Moon Jae-in. Imagine the sheer scale of an organization that started with 12, then 13, and eventually settled into a powerhouse of individual talents: Lee-dok, Hee-chul, Yesung, Shin-dong, Sungmin, Yoon-hyuk, Siwon, Donghae, Ryo-wook, and Kyuhyun. They weren't just a boy band, they were a cultural task force. The reason they sit at this prestigious number 4 spot is because of their unprecedented role as diplomatic idols. In 2012, during the height of the Sorry craze that had literally everyone from world leaders to prison inmates in the Philippines dancing, President Lee Myung-bak's administration recognized them as the primary drivers of the Korean wave's expansion into South America and Europe. But the real presidential king moment came during the administration of President Moon Jae-in. Can you picture the sheer gravity of a situation where, during a high-stakes state visit to Indonesia in 2017, the president of South Korea chose Super Junior to be the face of the nation's cultural power? They weren't just there to sing, they were there to bridge the gap between two nations. President Moon Jae-in famously praised them for their role in soft diplomacy. And when the president of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, revealed that his daughter was a massive fan, Super Junior became the ultimate icebreaker in international relations. They were even invited to the Blue House for a formal luncheon with the Indonesian president, a moment where the lines between pop star and ambassador completely vanished. This wasn't a one-off event. In 2018, they were the ones chosen to perform at the closing ceremony of the Asian Games, a moment of immense political and cultural significance. The South Korean government saw in Super Junior a group that was unbreakable. Despite the industry's notorious 5-year curse, despite military enlistments that took members away for a blank decade, and despite the shifting tides of music, they remained at the top. This resilience is what earned them the deep respect of the presidency. The Blue House staff often referred to them as the national representatives of Hallyu because no matter where the president went, whether it was Mexico, France, or Saudi Arabia, the sapphire blue sea followed. Their influence was so massive that they were the first K-pop group to hold a solo concert in Saudi Arabia, an event that was monitored by the Korean government as a landmark achievement in cultural exchange with the Middle East. Musically, they were the pioneers of the hook song era, but it was their personality, their variety show skills that made them beloved by the nation's leaders. They were approachable, funny, and incredibly professional, making them the perfect brand ambassadors. The presidency recognized that Super Junior didn't just sell albums, they sold the Korean dream. When Siwon was appointed as a regional ambassador for UNICEF East Asia and Pacific, it was a move supported by the state to project Korea's humanitarian image. The emotional journey of Super Junior is one of endurance. For the fans, known as ELF, Everlasting Friends, seeing their kings stand next to presidents wasn't just about fame, it was a validation of their loyalty. The government realized that the fandom's organization was a force to be reckoned with, a decentralized army of supporters who could boost the national brand better than any traditional advertising campaign. Think about the atmosphere in those diplomatic meetings while the politicians talked about trade and security. Super Junior was in the room providing the human touch that made those deals possible. They are the group that proved K-pop could be a lifelong career, showing the presidency that the idol industry was a sustainable, long-term economic pillar. Their legacy is defined by this transition from idols to statesmen of pop culture. They are the ones who made it normal for a president to carry a signed K-pop CD as a state gift. They didn't just break the glass ceiling for global touring, they smashed it and invited every other group to follow. Their kingship is a testament to the power of being the first to tour the world on this scale, the first to dominate international charts before social media was even a thing, and the first to be treated as genuine diplomatic peers by the Blue House. Can you feel the weight of their journey? From the uncertainty of their debut as a project group to becoming the group that the president calls when he needs to impress a world leader? They are the kings of longevity, the emperors of the wave, and the undisputed champions of the national image. As we move closer to the top of our list, the impact of these groups becomes even more legendary, shifting from diplomatic tools to global icons that literally redefined the world's perception of Asia. Who could possibly top the diplomatic power of Super Junior? What group was so massive that their impact was compared to the national budget itself? Are you ready to see who takes the number 3 spot in this royal countdown? Number 3. 2NE1. The sovereigns of self-expression, the trailblazers, who reinvigorated the nation's creative spirit. When we discuss the hierarchy of groups recognized by the South Korean presidency, we have to talk about the quartet that didn't just break the mold, they shattered it and rebuilt it in their own fierce, uncompromising image. 2NE1. During the administration of President Lee Myung-bak and later under Park Geun-hye, 2NE1 consisting of CL Bom Dara and Minzy were celebrated as the ultimate icons of the Creative Korea movement. They weren't just a girl group, they were a cultural phenomenon that represented the modernization and globalization of the Korean aesthetic. The Blue House recognized that 2NE1 possessed something that no other group had, a global coolness that was as influential in the fashion houses of Paris and Los Angeles as it was in the recording studios of Seoul. This wasn't just about music, it was about the government realizing that 2NE1 was the spearhead of a new kind of national brand that was edgy, sophisticated, and technologically advanced. One of the most significant moments of presidential recognition occurred when they were selected as the ambassadors for the Korea Brand and Entertainment Expo, KBEE, and were officially lauded by the government for their role in making K-pop a global premium brand. President Lee Myung-bak himself acknowledged their influence in soft power, noting how their unique style and self-produced energy were exactly what the nation needed to showcase its innovative spirit to this world. Imagine the atmosphere of 2011, when the world was just starting to wake up to the power of the Hallyu wave, and there was 2NE1 standing at the center of it all with I Am the Best. That song wasn't just a hit, It was a national anthem of confidence that the government used to promote the idea of a dynamic Korea. The presidency saw in CL, the leader, a figure of immense diplomatic potential, someone who was fluent in multiple languages and possessed a global mindset that could bridge the gap between East and West. This is why the government often highlighted their success in the United States and their collaborations with global icons like will.i.am and Jeremy Scott as a benchmark for national achievement. Can you imagine the pressure of being the group that the president points to as the future of the nation's economy? Their impact was so profound that even during state visits, 2NE1's influence was cited as a reason for the growing interest in Korean technology and fashion. They were the ones who proved that Koreanness didn't have to be traditional to be authentic. It could be futuristic, bold, and rebellious. The emotional weight of their narrative is rooted in their message of female empowerment, a theme that resonated deeply with the government's efforts to modernize social perspectives. When they performed, it wasn't just about the choreography. It was about the 2NE1 spirit, a sense of freedom and individuality that the presidency wanted to associate with the brand of the new South Korea. Their kingship, or queenship, as they redefined the term, was solidified when they became the first K-pop girl group to embark on a true world tour, an achievement that was monitored with great pride by the Ministry of Culture as a massive win for the country's international standing. They were the kings of the digital age, the ones who taught the government that being different was the most valuable asset a nation could have. The presidency recognized that 2NE1's fans, the Blackjacks, were a global community that saw South Korea through the lens of these four women powerful, talented, and ahead of their time. Their legacy is defined by this transition from idols to global cultural architects. They were the group that made the Blue House realize that the Korean wave wasn't just a passing storm, but a permanent shift in the world's cultural axis. Every award they won abroad was celebrated at home not just as a musical triumph, but as a victory for the state's diplomacy. Can you feel the intensity of a time when four women could make the highest leaders of a country believe that the future was already here? They were the queens who ruled with the authority of kings, paving the way for the world to see Korea as the epicenter of global cool. As we move into the final two spots on our list, the stakes reach a level of historic significance that is almost hard to comprehend, where music and national destiny become one and the same. Who could possibly be more influential than the icons who redefined cool? Who was the group that literally became the nation's greatest diplomatic weapon? Number 2. TVXQ. The Eternal Kings of the East, the legend that reclaimed the throne for a nation. When we reach the penultimate spot on our list of groups recognized by the presidency, we have to talk about the group whose very name, Tong Vifang Xianqi, translates to the Rising Gods of the East. TVXQ didn't just participate in the Hallyu wave. They were the seismic event that rescued the Korean music industry from a period of stagnation and turned it into an international powerhouse of economic and diplomatic significance. Emerging in 2003 under the administration of President Roh Moo-hyun, TVXQ, originally consisting of Yoonho Yoonho, Max Changmin, Haro Jae-jung, Mickey Yuchin, and Sia Junsu, carried a burden that no other group had faced. The task of proving that the idol model was not a fluke, but a sustainable pillar of the South Korean identity. The presidency at the time was focused on government of the people, and TVXQ became the people's greatest pride as they embarked on a mission to conquer Japan, the second largest music market in the world. Their success wasn't just a win for a record label, it was a matter of national prestige. For decades, the cultural relationship between Korea and Japan had been complex and often strained, but TVXQ did what politicians had struggled to do for generations. They won the hearts of the Japanese public so completely that they were invited to perform at the prestigious Kohaku Uta Gassen, an event the Blue House monitored as a milestone of cultural diplomacy. Can you imagine the sheer pressure of knowing that your performance on a Japanese stage was being viewed by your own president as a victory for the brand of Korea? The government officially recognized their contribution to the nation's soft power by noting that TVXQ is responsible for a significant percentage of the country's cultural export revenue, effectively turning music into a strategic asset. By the time the administration of President Lee Myung-bak took over, TVXQ was no longer just a group, they were a diplomatic institution. Their fans. The Red Ocean of Cassiopeia. were so numerous and organized, holding a Guinness World Record for the largest official fan club, that the government saw them as a global network of informal ambassadors. The presidency recognized that wherever TVXQ went, the image of Korea as a modern, sophisticated, and talented nation followed. One of the most emotional aspects of their kingship is their resilience. Even after a historic and painful split that saw the group continue as a duo with Yoonho and Changmin, their status in the eyes of the state remained untouchable. President Moon Jae-in famously included them in the national pride narrative, acknowledging that their longevity and discipline were the gold standard for all Korean citizens. They were the ones who proved that K-pop artists weren't just idols but total entertainers who could master languages, cultures, and diplomatic protocols. When they were invited to the Blue House or mentioned in official government white papers, it was because they had become the face of the nation in territories where traditional diplomacy was difficult. Their impact on the tourism industry was so massive that the government estimated their economic value in the billions, as fans from all over the world flooded into Korea just to walk the streets where these kings were born. This wasn't just fandom. This was a national economic engine fueled by the blood, sweat, and tears of two men who refused to let the crown slip. Their kingship is defined by this absolute authority over the stage and their unwavering loyalty to their country's reputation. Can you feel the weight of a legacy that spans over 2 decades, where every high note hit by Changmin and every powerful dance move by Yoonho was treated as a demonstration of Korean excellence? They were the first group to truly make the Blue House realize that music could be a bridge to the future, a tool for reconciliation, and a source of infinite national pride. They paved the way for every group that followed to be taken seriously by the government, turning the idol profession into one of the most respected roles in the country. As we stand at the threshold of our #1 spot, the story of TVXQ serves as the ultimate bridge between the pioneers of the past and the global conquerors of today. They were the kings of the East, but who is the group that took that crown and used it to conquer the entire world? Who is the group so influential that they didn't just meet the president, but became his most powerful diplomatic partners on the global stage? Are you ready to see who takes the throne as the #1 K-pop group officially recognized by the presidency? Number 1. BTS, the global sovereigns of the century, the special presidential envoys who conquered the heart of the United Nations. To arrive at the #1 spot on our list is to stand at the peak of a mountain that didn't even exist before these 7 men began their ascent, a place where the boundaries of pop star and global statesman have been permanently blurred under the absolute recognition of the South Korean presidency. We are talking about bangtan, better known to the world as BTS, a group that has moved beyond the realm of music to become a literal extension of the South Korean state's sovereign power and its most potent diplomatic weapon in history. The relationship between BTS and the Blue House is not just a series of photo opportunities. It is a historic alliance that reached its zenith when President Moon Jae-in officially appointed RM, Jin, Suga, J-Hope, Jimin, V, and Jungkook as special presidential envoys for future generations and culture in 2021. Imagine the gravity of that moment. 7 young men who started in a small basement studio under a tiny agency, standing in the grand hall of the Blue House, receiving red diplomatic passports that grant them the same level of international protection and status as the nation's highest-ranking diplomats. This was a scene that felt like a movie, yet it was the reality of a country acknowledging that these 7 individuals had done more to elevate the brand of Korea than decades of traditional diplomacy ever could. When they stood at the podium of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, not once but multiple times, they weren't just representing a fandom. They were the official voice of a nation and a generation, speaking directly to world leaders about sustainability, hope, and the resilience of youth during a global pandemic. Can you feel the hush that fell over the world as they walked through the empty halls of the UN to film their permission to dance performance? That wasn't just a music video, it was a state-sponsored declaration of survival and joy that the South Korean government used to showcase its cultural leadership to the entire planet. The presidency recognized that BTS was an economic miracle in human form, with the Hyundai Research Institute estimating their annual contribution to the South Korean economy at over $5 billion, a figure so staggering it rivals the revenue of the nation's largest conglomerates like Samsung and Hyundai. They didn't just sell albums, they sold a vision of Korea that was compassionate, diverse, and undeniably cool. Their influence was so massive that the government literally had to debate changing the nation's sacred conscription laws, the BTS law, to accommodate their unprecedented global impact, a discussion that reached the highest levels of the National Assembly and the presidency. Under President Moon Jae-in, they were the national pride that accompanied him to the White House to meet President Joe Biden, where they spoke out against anti-Asian hate crimes, showing that their kingship was rooted in moral authority as much as musical talent. And the recognition didn't stop with one administration. As the political landscape shifted, President Yoon Suk-yeol's government continued to lean on their power, appointing them as the official ambassadors for the 2030 Busan World Expo bid. This culminated in the legendary Yet to Come in Busan concert, an event where the entire city turned purple, and the government provided massive logistical support because they knew that BTS was the only force capable of drawing the eyes of the entire world to the shores of Korea in a single night. The emotional journey of BTS is a story of blood, sweat, and tears that transformed into a crown of gold, a crown that was polished by the hands of the president himself. They are the only group to have received the Order of Cultural Merit at such a young age, an honor usually reserved for legends with decades of service, because the state realized that BTS had compressed a century of cultural progress into less than a decade. The Blue House staff often noted that whenever the president met other world leaders, the first thing they wanted to talk about wasn't trade or security, it was BTS. They had become the ultimate icebreaker, the bridge that connected Korea to every corner of the globe, from the streets of Brazil to the deserts of Saudi Arabia. Their kingship is total and absolute. They are the kings of the 21st century, who proved that the voice of 7 boys from Korea could become the heartbeat of the world. Every time RM stands before a microphone to deliver a speech in English, he isn't just a leader of a group, he is a representative of a sovereign dream that has finally come true. The presidency saw in BTS a reflection of Korea's own journey from a struggling, war-torn nation to a high-tech cultural superpower that dictates the global agenda. They are the kings because they didn't just seek the president's recognition, they earned it by becoming so indispensable to the nation's identity that the presidency and the group became two halves of the same story. This is the ultimate peak of our countdown, a group that stands as a living monument to what is possible when talent, sincerity, and national support collide to change the course of history forever. They have secured their place not just in the music charts, but in the official annals of the Republic of Korea, forever etched as the 7 kings who wore the weight of the nation on their shoulders and made it look like a dance